Truth is a mercury shadow, fluid and elusive, shifting its shape just as you think you have finally caught it. Dive into our latest mystery, where nothing is as it seems, and everyone has a hidden agenda. Hit subscribe now and help us track the truth today.
The morning I found out my husband had been lying to me for 2 years, I was standing in the kitchen making his mother's favorite coffee cake. That detail still gets me. I was measuring out the brown sugar, thinking about whether I had enough pecans, when my phone buzzed on the counter with a notification from our joint business account. A transfer, $60,000, to an LLC I had never seen before. I put the measuring cup down very carefully. The way you do when your hands are shaking but you don't want anyone to know. Let me back up. My name is not important. What matters is this. I am 31 years old. I built a small event planning company from nothing. From a folding table in my apartment and a laptop with a cracked screen, and by the time I was 28, it was bringing in over $400,000 a year. Corporate events, weddings, nonprofit galas. I was good at it. I was really, really good at it. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he was, legally for 4 years, had been working in pharmaceutical sales when we met. Decent money, company car, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties. We fell in love the way you do in your mid-20s, fast and certain, and when I asked him to come work with me 2 years into our marriage, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I trusted him completely. He was my husband. We were building something together. His mother had a different way of describing it. My son is basically running that company now, she told someone at Thanksgiving. I was standing 6 feet away, refilling the gravy boat. I heard every word. I smiled and kept walking. That should have been the moment. That should have been when I paid attention. Instead, I made her coffee cake every time she visited. I answered her calls when my husband didn't. I sent her flowers on her birthday and drove 4 hours round trip to be at my brother-in-law's college graduation, even though I had a vendor meeting the next morning at 7. I was the kind of daughter-in-law who tried so hard it probably looked like a performance. But it wasn't. I genuinely wanted them to love me. I grew up with a mother who never met a stranger, who made everyone around her feel seen, and I think I spent most of my adult life trying to replicate that. To earn a place in rooms I was technically already allowed to be in. My father-in-law died 2 years before everything fell apart. Heart attack, sudden, devastating. My husband was wrecked. I took over most of his responsibilities at the company while he grieved. Vendor negotiations, client calls, payroll, invoicing. I didn't complain. That's what you do for the person you love. What I didn't realize was that while I was handling his workload, my mother-in-law was handling something else entirely. She had started calling my husband every day. Long calls, an hour sometimes, and he would always take them in the garage or on the back porch. If I walked by, he'd turn slightly away, lower his voice. I told myself it was grief, that they needed each other. I gave them space because that's what I thought a good wife did. My brother-in-law had moved back home after losing his job in Boston. He was living with my mother-in-law, which made sense. She was rattling around in a big house alone. And then, slowly, he started showing up at things. Company things. My husband invited him to a client dinner, then to a vendor walkthrough. Then one day I came into the office we kept downtown, and my brother-in-law was sitting at the conference table with a folder in front of him, and my husband was introducing him to our biggest corporate client as our new operations director. I did not know about this. I had not agreed to this. We talked about it, my husband said later when I brought it up. Calmly, like I was misremembering. We had not talked about it. I let it go, I don't know why. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I didn't want the fight. Maybe some part of me had already started to understand what was happening and I wasn't ready to look at it directly. Over the next several months, small things shifted. My name was dropped from the email signature on 2 client accounts. Clerical error, my husband said. My login to our booking software stopped working one afternoon. ID said someone had changed the admin credentials. Vendors I'd worked with for years started CCing my husband on replies instead of me. A contract came back with his signature as the sole owner. I had signed the original. Every time I raised it, there was an explanation. And the explanations were always just plausible enough that I couldn't prove the alternative without sounding paranoid. My mother-in-law had a phrase she used when I would bring concerns to my husband. She's always been a little high-strung. I know this because his cousin told me, years later, that she heard it at least a dozen times. The $60,000 transfer was not the first unusual transaction. It was just the first one I caught in real time. I stood in my kitchen with brown sugar on my hands and I opened my banking app and I looked at the transfer. The receiving account was an LLC registered in Delaware. The name meant nothing to me. I typed it into my browser. The registered agent was my brother-in-law. I put my phone face down on the counter. I finished the coffee cake, I let it cool, I iced it. I set it on the table before my mother-in-law arrived, and I watched her cut herself a large slice and tell my husband how wonderful it looked, and I smiled the whole time, and I did not say a single word about what I had found. Because I had already decided what I was going to do, and I needed time to do it right. The first call I made was to my attorney, not a divorce attorney. Not yet, but the business attorney I'd had since I founded the company. She is one of the sharpest people I have ever met, and she does not waste words. I walked her through everything: the dropped email signatures, the changed credentials, the contract with only my husband's name, the $60,000 transfer to an LLC I'd never heard of. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How soon can you come in?" I went in the next morning. I brought every document I could find: formation papers, tax filings, the original partnership agreement my husband and I had signed when he joined the company, bank statements going back 18 months. My attorney went through everything carefully, and then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "There are potentially serious legal issues here. We need to move carefully, but we need to move." We started with a forensic accountant. She came recommended and she was methodical and, over the course of about 3 weeks, she went through every transaction in the company accounts going back 2 years. What she found was not $60,000. It was closer to $220,000, moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic scrutiny, routed through the Delaware LLC, and then split into payments that looked, on the surface, like vendor invoices. Except the vendors didn't exist. The invoice numbers were sequential in a way that no real vendor invoicing system would produce. She said it had the pattern of someone who understood bookkeeping well enough to try to hide things, but not well enough to do it cleanly. My brother-in-law had a business degree. My husband had taken 2 accounting courses in college. Together, apparently, they thought they were smarter than they were. I kept going to work. I kept attending family dinners. My mother-in-law made a comment about how I seemed distracted lately, and I told her I was just stressed about an upcoming gala. And she patted my hand and said she was sure I'd figure it out. I nodded and poured her more wine. The hardest part of those 3 weeks was not the discovery. The hardest part was my sister. She lives in Austin, and she is the only family I have who tells me the complete truth without softening it. I called her one night after my husband was asleep, and I sat in my car in the driveway, with the windows fogged, and I told her everything. Not the polished version. The real one: the shaking hands, the coffee cake, the way I'd been pretending for 3 weeks, the $220,000. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You already know what you have to do." "I know," I said. "Don't warn them," she said. "Don't give them a chance to cover their tracks. You go to the lawyer, you get everything locked, and then you let them find out when there's nothing left to undo." She was right. She was completely right. I already knew that, but I needed to hear it from someone who loved me say it out loud. The next 2 weeks were the most focused I have ever been in my life. My attorney helped me start the process of formally re-establishing my sole ownership of the business, pulling together documentation to demonstrate that the company predated my marriage, that I had been the original and primary founder, and that my husband's role had been as an employee, not an owner. The partnership agreement we'd signed was informal and arguably superseded by the original formation documents. She was careful to tell me what could be proven and what couldn't, and what would require litigation. I appreciated her honesty even when it was complicated. We also reported the financial transfers to our bank's fraud department and began the process of involving law enforcement regarding the funds that had been moved to the Delaware LLC. My attorney made clear this was not just a civil matter. Moving money out of a business account through fictitious invoices is fraud, potentially wire fraud depending on how the transfers were routed. These are not small words. I also quietly changed the admin credentials on every piece of software the company used. I had IT reassign access levels. I updated the signatory on the main operating account. I moved the company's primary revenue deposits to a new account my husband did not have access to. I did all of this on a Tuesday. I told no one except my attorney, the forensic accountant, and my sister. On Wednesday morning, I sent one email. It went to my husband and my brother-in-law, and it was 4 sentences. I am aware of the transfers made to the LLC registered in your name. I have engaged legal counsel and a forensic accountant, and their findings have been submitted to the appropriate parties. Effective immediately, your access to all company accounts, software, and vendor contacts has been suspended. Please contact my attorney for next steps. I included her contact information. Then I put my phone in my desk drawer, closed it, and went to get coffee. I remember standing at the little espresso machine in the office kitchen and feeling for the first time in months completely not happy, not triumphant exactly, just still, the way the air feels right after a storm has passed. My phone had been in the drawer for about 40 minutes when my husband called. I know this because my assistant knocked on my door and said, "Your husband is calling," and then calling again. "He's on his 4th call. Please let it go to voicemail," I said. I did not speak to my husband that day. I did not speak to my mother-in-law, who called twice in the afternoon, or my brother-in-law, who called once and then texted something I only read later. The text said, "You need to calm down, this is a misunderstanding." I saved it. My attorney heard from my husband's attorney by end of business that same day. Apparently, there was a great deal of emotion involved in that initial communication. My attorney described the call to me as energetic. I spent that evening at my sister's place. She had flown in from Austin that morning without telling me she was coming. She just showed up at my office at noon with a rolling suitcase and said she wasn't leaving until things were settled. And we sat on my couch and ate takeout Thai food. And she let me talk until I ran out of things to say. And then we watched 2 episodes of something neither of us will remember. And I slept for 8 hours straight for the first time in weeks. The legal process was not fast and it was not clean, and there is still a portion of it I can't discuss because it's ongoing. What I can tell you is this. The documentation was clear enough and the forensic accountant's report detailed enough that the situation resolved significantly in my favor. My husband and I separated. The company remained mine. The funds that had been transferred were substantially recovered through the legal process. My brother-in-law faced real consequences that I won't detail here but that were proportional to what he did. My mother-in-law did not speak to me after I sent that email. Not once. Not a text, not a card, nothing. I found out through mutual acquaintances that she had a version of events in which I had been cold and calculating from the start, in which her son had been taken advantage of, in which the whole thing was somehow the story of a woman with too much ambition and too little loyalty. I thought about that version of events for a long time. I thought about the coffee cake and the flower deliveries and the 4-hour drive to the graduation. I thought about the years I had spent trying to belong to a family that had been treating me like a resource rather than a person. I thought about the word high-strung and how it is the word people use for women who notice things. And then I stopped thinking about it. Not because it stopped hurting, it didn't, but because it wasn't mine to carry anymore. The company had its best revenue year ever this past year. We expanded into a second market. I hired a real operations director, one I chose, who reports to me. I renegotiated 3 vendor contracts and landed the largest corporate client we've ever had, a regional healthcare network that booked us for their annual conference series through 2027. My sister came to the launch party for our new office space. She stood next to me when I cut the ribbon. We didn't have a ribbon. Actually, it was a piece of twine my office manager found in a supply closet, which made it better. And she leaned over and said quietly, "Look at what you built." And I did look. I looked at the team I had put together, at the clients who had come to celebrate with us, at the walls I had painted myself on a Saturday afternoon, because I wanted the color to be exactly right, and I didn't trust anyone else to do it. I looked at everything that existed, because I had sat down at a folding table with a cracked screen laptop and refused to give up. There is a certain kind of person who mistakes patience for weakness, who looks at someone who keeps showing up, who keeps being generous, who keeps trying, and reads it as an invitation. They think the giving means you have nothing left to defend. They miscalculate. I don't think about my husband much anymore. I think about my sister, and the twine ribbon, and the espresso I drank while my phone sat in a closed drawer and the world rearranged itself. I think about the Tuesday I decided I was done explaining myself. That's the day that matters, not the day I found the transfer, not the day I sent the email, the day before all of that, standing in my kitchen with brown sugar on my hands, when I made a quiet decision to finally protect what was mine. Because it was mine. It always had been. And no version of any story changes that.